The plains stretched farther than the eye could follow, rolling in quiet waves of yellow grass that shimmered beneath the lowering sun. Elias Crowley had lived on this land for more years than he cared to count, long enough for the wind to memorize his name and the old wooden beams of his house to grow familiar with the rhythm of his footsteps. His ranch sat on the edge of the Arizona frontier, far enough from town that the silence felt like a living thing, constant, patient, and cold when night approached. He had once shared this land with laughter, with warm meals and soft voices, with the presence of someone who had known him better than anyone alive. But those days were gone now. The ranch had become a place of routines, not conversations, tasks, not companionship. And Elias, despite the strength still hidden in his aging frame, walked through his days like a man tending both land and memory. That evening he moved slowly across the yard, carrying a bucket of grain toward the horse stalls. The sun hung low, bleeding orange and gold into the sky as the long shadows of the corral stretched like dark fingers over the dirt. His boots scuffed the ground, dust lifting around them. Somewhere beyond the fence, a coyote called out once, then quieted. "Easy, boys," Elias murmured as he approached the barn. His voice was steady, the kind of softness that only comes from speaking to animals more often than people. "Dinner's comin'." The horses huffed and shifted inside. Normally they greeted him with familiar snorts or the rhythmic stamp of hooves. But tonight, something felt different. The horses weren't restless. They were alert. A low, nervous whinny rippled through the stalls. Elias paused, studying the barn door. It was pulled halfway closed. He didn't remember leaving it that way. The windmill squeaked behind him, turning slowly, creaking like an old man waking from sleep. He set the grain bucket down and reached for the lantern that hung near the door. As he lifted it, the flame danced softly against the glass, sending orange light across the barn's worn wooden planks. Something inside the building shifted. Not much, just the faint scrape of weight against the floor. The sound was too controlled to be an animal. Elias tightened his grip on the lantern and pushed the barn door open with his shoulder. The hinges groaned a warning. He stepped inside. Warm hay and dust filled his nose. The air felt thicker than usual, as if someone had drawn in breath and forgotten to let it go. The horses shuffled, their eyes wide in the lantern glow. And then he heard it. Slow, steady breathing. Human breathing. "Who's in here?" Elias asked, his voice firm but even. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "I ain't looking for trouble, but this is my property." A shape shifted in the far corner, half hidden behind stacked hay bales and the upright support beam. Elias lifted the lantern higher. A woman appeared in the light, towering, broad-shouldered, and standing so still she looked carved from stone. She wore deerskin clothing faded from travel, dust coating every seam. Her long, dark hair hung in thick braids that reached nearly to her waist. Her chest rose and fell heavily, as though breathing itself had become a burden. Her eyes watched him like a cornered wolf, sharp, assessing, tired beyond measure. Elias felt the weight of those eyes. He had not seen an Apache up close in years, and never one like her. She was taller than any woman he had ever met, maybe taller than most men. Strength radiated from her posture, yet her exhaustion was impossible to miss. She leaned against the beam slightly, as though her legs trembled beneath her. "Don't come closer," she warned, voice hoarse. Elias stopped where he stood. "All right. Just tell me what you're doing in my barn." The woman stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide whether he was enemy or something else. The silence hung tight between them, heavy with old tensions from a land where misunderstandings turned deadly. Then she spoke, blunt and sharp as a thrown knife. "I haven't had sex in 6 months." Elias blinked. "Ma'am, what?" She exhaled with irritation, not at him, but at the world. "It is something I say to keep men away on long roads. It scares them." She rubbed the bridge of her nose, weary. "I did not think before saying it. I am exhausted." Elias let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Well, you sure got the job done. But I ain't here bothering you like that." "I know," she said quietly. "That is why I am still standing here." Her stance softened a little, though her hands remained near the small knife at her belt. Elias didn't blame her. A lone traveler, especially a woman, had every reason to mistrust strangers in these parts. and an Apache woman even more so. "What's your name?" Elias asked gently. She hesitated. "Tala Neshoba." "That's a good name." He nodded. "I'm Elias Crowley." The lantern flickered between them, casting shadows across Tala's tired face. In the wavering light, he could see the strain in her expression, the cracked lips, the dust burn on her cheeks, the tremor running through her arms. She looked like she had traveled farther than any sane person should, and had done it too long without rest. "You hurt?" Elias asked. Tala shook her head at first, out of pride more than honesty. But when her legs buckled slightly, she caught herself against the beam with a pained grunt. Elias stepped forward instinctively. She reacted instantly, hand flying to her knife hilt. Elias halted, palms lifted. "Easy now," he said softly. "I ain't gonna touch you. But you look like you're about to drop, right there on the floor." Tala swallowed hard, her guard trembling. "I have walked many days. I needed a place to rest. Your barn was open." There was something almost apologetic in her final word. Elias studied her, the same way he'd studied injured cattle, looking for signs of collapse, dehydration, wounds. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. One of her knees was swollen. Her breathing scraped harshly through her throat. "You got water today?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Food?" She lowered her eyes. Shame crept across her features. "No, not since yesterday morning." He nodded slowly. "All right. I can fix that." Tala's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Why? Why what? Why help me?" The question held no hostility, only deep confusion, as if kindness was something she no longer understood. Elias scratched his chin. "Because you look like someone who needs it, and because it's the decent thing to do." Her expression faltered, distrust warring with hope. "You stay right there," Elias said. "I'll bring you something. You don't gotta move." He backed away, careful not to make sudden motions. Tala watched him as if expecting a trick, but he only stepped outside briefly and returned with a tin cup of well water and a small loaf of bread from his kitchen. He set them on a wooden crate a few feet from her and stepped back again. Tala eyed the food like it might disappear if she blinked. She approached slowly, favoring her swollen leg. When she reached the crate, she lifted the cup with both hands and drank greedily, water running down her chin. The bread vanished even faster. Elias waited quietly, letting her take what she needed. When she finished, she wiped her mouth and straightened, looking at him with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude she didn't know how to express. "You saved my strength," she murmured. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he said simply. The barn grew still again, filled only with the soft rustle of hay and the calm breathing of the horses, who seemed to sense the danger had passed. "Listen," Elias said slowly. "There's a spare cot in the corner. Not fancy, but better than the floor. You can rest there tonight. I'll lock the barn from outside so no one else comes in. You'll be safe." Tala's eyes widened slightly. It wasn't fear he saw. It was confusion at being offered safety she hadn't earned. "You trust me?" she asked. "I trust that you're tired," Elias replied. "And that tired people don't cause trouble." Something within her shifted at that. A small part of her walls lowered. Just enough. She moved to the cot with stiff steps and sat down heavily. Elias set the lantern on a hook near the door. "I'll be in the house if you need anything," he said. Tala looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Elias Crowley," she said softly, as if testing the sound of his name. "You are not what I expected." He gave a faint smile. "Most folks ain't." When Elias stepped out of the barn and pulled the door closed, the night wrapped around him in its usual stillness. But something felt different now, like another heartbeat had joined the land. Inside the barn, Tala lay back on the cot, aching bones finally sinking into rest. She listened to the horses settle, to the faint hum of the lantern, to the distant creak of the windmill. Two strangers, separated by culture, danger, and years of loneliness, now shared the same quiet space. And neither of them knew how deeply this night would change the rest of their lives. The first light of morning crept over the horizon, painting the plains in pale gold. Elias Crowley stepped out of his house with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, stretching his back until his spine cracked like old timber. He looked toward the barn, where the roof beams caught the early sunlight. For the first time in a long while, he felt something unusual in the air, an unfamiliar sense of expectation, like the land itself was waiting to see what would happen next. He made his way across the yard, boots crunching through dry grass. The horses were quiet this morning, calmer than the night before. Elias slid open the barn door with a soft groan of hinges and stepped inside, letting the warm morning light filter across the hay-strewn floor. Tala Neshoba was already awake. She stood near the stall where his old mare Silverbell nudged her hand with a gentle insistence. Tala's tall frame almost touched the rafters as she moved with slow, deliberate motions, running her fingers along the horse's neck. Her braids hung loose down her back, frayed at the ends from long travel. If she had slept, it had not been nearly long enough. Elias watched her for a moment before speaking. "She likes you." Tala's hand paused on the horse's mane. She turned her head slightly toward him, her expression guarded at first. Then she nodded once. "She is calm. Most animals sense intent before words." "Can't argue with that," Elias said, stepping closer. "Horses know a good heart faster than people do." Tala didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. She studied him the way one studies a river, measuring its depth and speed before choosing to cross. "You rested some?" Elias asked. Her eyes lowered. "Enough to stand again. Good. You needed it." Tala exhaled through her nose, as if uncomfortable with being cared for. "I stayed because my body failed me, not because I wished to burden you." "I didn't say you were a burden," Elias replied gently. "You needed shelter. That's all." Tala did not respond. Instead, she turned back to the horse, but Elias could sense the tension softening in her shoulders. He set his coffee aside and opened the small grain sack near the stall. Silverbell pricked her ears at the familiar sound, and Elias chuckled. "Easy now. Don't get greedy." He scooped a handful of feed into the wooden trough. Tala watched him, curiosity flickering across her features. "You talk to your animals as if they understand." "They do," Elias said. "Maybe not every word, but they understand tone, kindness, patience. Most men do not use those things," Tala said quietly. Elias paused, hearing the weight in her voice. "You meet a lot of men on the road?" "Too many," she answered flatly. "Some curious, some cruel, some foolish. Most not worth remembering." She looked at him out of the corner of her eye. "You are different," he shrugged slightly. "Just trying to be decent." Decency, he knew, wasn't a complication. It was a choice, and he could see clearly that the world hadn't given Tala much of it. The barn grew brighter as the sun climbed. Dust motes drifted through the air, glowing like tiny floating embers. Elias watched Tala stretch her back slowly, wincing when her swollen knee bent at the wrong angle. "You ought not be standing too long on that leg," he said. "It will mend." "Only if you give it time." Tala frowned as if unused to being told to rest. "Rest is a luxury. It's also how a body heals." She looked toward the barn door, studying the open plains. The wind pushed strands of her hair over her shoulder. For a moment, her eyes softened with something like longing. "My people believe the body heals when the spirit is steady. Mine is not steady right now." "You want to talk about it?" Elias asked. Her head shook immediately. "Talking does not fix hunger, or sickness, or the distance between here and my village." Elias nodded slowly. "No, but it can ease a heavy mind." Tala didn't respond, but he saw the faintest tremor of thought behind her eyes. He decided not to press further. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you something to eat." She didn't follow at first. Her gaze flicked to the barn door again, then to Elias, and back to the door. The instinct to flee was still inside her, coiled like a spring. But exhaustion held her in place, and a deeper instinct, one she did not yet trust, kept her from stepping away from him. Eventually, she nodded once. Elias led her to the house, keeping his steps slow so she wouldn't feel hurried. The old cabin smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Tala paused at the doorway, uncertainty shadowing her features. "You can come in," Elias said. "Ain't nothin' in here gonna bite." She stepped across the threshold with hesitation, her eyes scanning every corner as though expecting a trap. Her people had suffered too many betrayals for her to enter any man's home lightly. Elias moved to the kitchen and set a tin plate on the table. He pulled out leftover biscuits from the night before, reheated them on the stove, and added a small piece of salted pork. Tala stood stiffly by the doorway until he gestured to the chair. "You can sit." She obeyed with the rigid posture of someone not used to being served. When she lifted the biscuit, she examined it cautiously, then took a slow bite. Steam curled from her lips as she chewed. She tried to hide it, but relief softened her eyes with every mouthful. Elias brewed fresh coffee and poured her a cup. She sniffed it once, then took a small sip. She lowered the cup quickly. "This is strong." "That's the point," Elias chuckled. "Wakes you up, or knocks you down." He smiled. She didn't return it, but her gaze lingered on him an extra second, as if trying to understand how a man could be unarmed, calm, and unafraid of her. "What brings you this far from your people?" Elias asked gently. "You said you were traveling for medicine." Tala set the cup down. Her hands tightened on the handle. "My village has suffered drought. The river shrank, crops yellowed, children grew thin. I was chosen to search for supplies, herbs, roots, anything the land could give." "That's a long journey." "It is necessary. There ain't a moment you thought about turning back?" Tala looked him straight in the eyes. "A protector does not turn back." That sentence carried a lifetime behind it. Elias recognized the tone. It was the same tone he used to have when he was younger, when the world still demanded that men stand firm whether or not they wanted to. He nodded. "I can respect that." For the first time, something like a flicker of connection passed between them. After breakfast, Elias stepped outside to begin his chores. He expected Tala to stay seated and rest her injured leg. Instead, within minutes, she followed him out, limping slightly but determined. "You don't have to help," Elias said. "I do not sit idle. I'm not asking you to sit idle. I'm asking you to rest." "I will work," she said, voice final. Elias breathed out slowly. Stubbornness, it seemed, wasn't limited to one culture. She joined him by the fence where a few rails had loosened after a recent storm. Elias handed her a hammer without thinking. She caught it easily, turning it over in her hand with practiced strength. "You done fence work before?" Elias asked. "I have built shelters, walls, traps, many things. Well, the principle's the same." She swung the hammer with sure precision, striking the nails cleanly. Elias watched her, impressed despite himself. The way she worked had rhythm, purpose. Even injured, she carried the weight of each motion with a quiet power. "Careful on that leg," he reminded her. "I am careful enough." "You say that, but you're wincing. Between swings." Tala paused, glaring at him as if he had spoken blasphemy. "I am not wincing." "You are." "I am not." He raised his eyebrows. "You sure?" Her jaw tightened, perhaps a little. The admission was so reluctant that Elias almost laughed. Almost. But he didn't want to offend her. They worked for nearly an hour. The sun rose higher, warming the ranch. Cattle grazed lazily at the far end of the field. A hawk circled overhead. Tala's hammer strikes slowed as the pain in her leg grew harder to hide. Finally, Elias held up a hand. "That's enough. Sit before you fall." "I will not fall." "Tala," he said firmly, "you're about to drop like a stone, and we both know it." She opened her mouth to argue, but the moment she shifted her weight, her injured knee buckled slightly. Elias stepped forward, hands ready but not touching her. She steadied herself on the fence post, breathing through clenched teeth. "Just sit," he said quietly. "Ain't no shame in rest." Her shoulders rising and falling, Tala lowered herself onto a nearby stump, bracing her palms against her thighs. Elias knelt to check the swelling on her knee, stopping himself before he touched it. "May I look?" Tala hesitated, then nodded once. He examined the joint carefully, without causing pain. "It's swollen pretty bad, could be a sprain, needs cold water and less walking." "I cannot stay long," Tala murmured. "I must continue." "You ain't going anywhere with that leg today." "What if I must?" "Then you'll make it worse." She exhaled sharply, frustration cutting through her breath. "I did not come here to be slowed." "You came here looking for help," Elias said softly. "Let me give it." Her eyes lifted to his, searching, uncertain, vulnerable in a way she didn't want to be. Before she could respond, a faint rumble carried across the plains. Hoofbeats, multiple. Tala stiffened instantly, instinct shifting to alertness. Elias turned toward the road, seeing distant dust rising behind a group of riders approaching from town. His jaw tightened. "They're early," he muttered. Tala rose unsteadily, hand near her knife. "Easy," Elias said, stepping between her and the open road. "Let me do the talking." She looked at him, fear buried deep beneath her steady gaze. "Do you trust me?" Elias asked. The question hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Finally, Tala whispered, "I do not know." "That's all right," Elias said. "Just stay behind me." The riders were still far away, but their direction was unmistakable. Trouble was coming, and neither Elias nor Tala had the strength to face it alone. They came down the road like a dark rumor. Men on horseback, faces grim, dust rising behind their wheels of motion. Elias saw the plume from the house as soon as he stepped out with a pail of water in hand. The herd loads somewhere behind him, uneasy in the heat. He watched the riders pull closer, their silhouettes sharp against the late morning sun, and felt a cold line curl beneath his ribs. There was nothing unusual about townsfolk coming to the ranch. He bartered and bought feed, traded a fistful of work for a sack of flour sometimes. This was different. The way they rode, shoulders squared, mouths set, made his teeth ache with a warning. He set the pail down and wiped his hands on his trousers, squinting against the glare. The lead riders slowed when they neared the gate. Elias recognized a few of the faces. Langford, who ran the general store and liked to give his opinion free of charge. Sheriff McCall, who wore his badge like a second skin. A cluster of other townsmen who carried rifles slung across their backs and distrust in the set of their jaws. "Crowley," Langford called before they even pulled up all the way. His voice carried. "We heard you had company." Elias didn't let the hint of accusation sink in. He kept his voice even. "We get all sorts of company these days." Langford's jaw twitched. "Not that kind, old man. An Apache woman. Folks claim she's been seen round your place." Elias felt the world fold small with that single sentence. His first instinct was to deny, to claim ignorance. But the truth had weight. Denial would be the same as lying. He had no patience for that. "She's here," he said. "Passed through last night. Needed shelter." Langford folded his arms. "You can't be housing any Indian on your ranch. Folks are worried. We've had trouble. Trade losses. Sends people on edge." Elias bristled at the implication. He had watched enough decades pass to know that fear made cowards of good sense. "She ain't a problem. She's traveling. For supplies. She's hurt." Sheriff McCall shifted in his saddle. He was a large man with a square chin that made it hard to see softness in him. "You know the law, Crowley. Our ordinance about travelers. We can't be sheltering folks that bring trouble." "You're thinking trouble without knowing the facts," Elias replied. "All I know is that she came to me tired and hungry." Langford frowned, spitting the last of his words like gravel. "The town's scared. Times are thin. Folks see strangers and assume the worst. Sometimes they see what they want," Elias said, quiet now. He didn't like to argue with men in a group. Men fed off one another. Grudges grew teeth. If you've got a complaint, you talk straight. Don't come here parading fear. Sheriff McCall narrowed his eyes. "We come peaceably, but we can't ignore what folks are saying. If she's hiding from someone, we need to know who and why." Elias felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't felt in years, a heat that rose from the same place where memories of his wife rested. He remembered promises made in quiet voices long ago, to stand up for what was fair, to keep safe those beneath his roof. His jaw hardened. "She's not hiding from anyone," he said. "She came for help. That's it." Langford's posture shifted, a tilt that suggested accusation turning to suspicion. "What you feedin' her, Crowley? What do you want from Dragon? Trouble into our county?" "Nothing," Elias said. The single word carried the weight of his honest life. He had no use for trouble. He had a fence to mend, and a mare that liked soft oats, and a patch of land that needed his hands. But he also had a sense of the world that refused to be cruel when kindness could work. Sheriff McCall gave Elias a long look, the kind that measured a man for damage. "We'll be passing through the ranch on patrol later. Be ready." They rode away with the rustle of horses and the crackle of gossip left in their wake. Langford's last glare was a promise of more talk in the long weeks to come, and Elias watched them go with a cold knot under his sternum. He turned toward the barn and found Tala at the fence, working on a splintered rail with rough hands that had loved and labored for other things instead of fences. When she noticed him, she straightened, a flash of exhaustion and steel crossing her features. "They were here," she said without preamble. "Yeah." Elias inhaled, thinking of the way Langford had said, "Apache," as if it were a disease. "Came see if I'm sharing. Shelter." Her fingers tightened on the rail. Something small and human, a flare of anger, rose in her eyes. "I did not ask for their notice." "You didn't ask to be noticed," Elias said, "but you are. Folks are nervous." "We are hunted with words," she said. "Not rifles yet, but words are a warm-up." The image landed in him with an odd tenderness. She named a truth he'd watched all his life. Fear begins in mouth and grows teeth in hands. "How far will they go?" Tala asked. Elias shrugged. "Some'll gawk, some'll wag tongues. A few right out here with more than words." He'd seen the pattern decades ago. Men feel less guilty when they're many. A crowd is a faceless shield. Tala exhaled slowly. "I must leave." Elias almost laughed at the reflex, not because it was funny, but because he could imagine the size of the world outside and the way she shouldered it alone. "Not with that leg," he said, her jaw clenched. "You sheltered me. You kept me safe. I cannot let my presence be the cause of harm." "You won't be the cause," Elias said. "If they think you are, I'll stand in front of them." She stared at him, incredulous that an old man would offer himself in such a way. "You would do that?" He remembered his wife's voice, steady and clear. "Do what's right, no matter the cost." He had meant to do right then and there, long before he ever imagined a woman like Tala leaning against his beam. "Yeah," he said, "if it comes to that." Her eyes softened, but the softening was edged with fear. "You have not known what I have known. Men look at my people and do not look at the man in front of them." "And sometimes men don't look at people at all," Elias said. "They look at danger where none stands. You're not that." Words alone were poor armor. He knew that. The townsmen could come back saying worse. Their fear could turn loud, then cruel, then violent. He had seen brawls at town lines, men who thought their guns answered everything. He had fought fights in younger years. His arm remembered the weight of a rifle, even if his bones were slower now. He walked beside her to gather tools, and she limped with a stubbornness that made him marvel. She moved like a mountain that didn't know it could break. For all her height, there was an old weariness behind her eyes, a memory of things heavy beyond a body's load. Famine, children's coughs, nights of quiet terror. Elias set to work patching the broken rail, his hands steady. Tala watched him for a long time, then took the hammer he handed over and drove the nail with blunt precision. Working with him was like speaking a language without words. Their movements matched, and, for a few heartbeats, there was nothing between them but timber and the honest rhythm of effort. Passing a tool from one hand to another felt like trust given small. When the day wore on, Elias suggested she rest while he walked into town for feed. She surprised him by shaking her head. "I will not be idle." "You really should," he insisted. "You'll be worse for wear if you keep pushing." "I must do what I can." He could have argued until his voice was raw, but he saw the set of her shoulders, pride braided with responsibility. People are who they are, he'd learned, and sometimes the best you can do is stand by and keep a watchful eye. At the edge of the road, he met the general store's rickety porch again, the boards well worn by boots and time. Langford's face was a map of small grievances. He watched Elias approach with a mixture of triumph and suspicion. "So, you hold out on us, Crowley. That girl still with you?" he asked. "She's here," Elias said. "She's hurt." Langford snorted. "Hurt, sure, or hiding something." "You think I'd hide trouble?" Elias snapped. The retort was quick but tired. He didn't want a fight that would make them all cock their chins harder and decide a man's life of hospitality was a crime. "Look here," Sheriff McCall said, coming down the steps. He kept his voice measured. "Men with badges know how to make a threat sound like a question. We can't have tension spilling into town. People don't like it. We can't have people bullying folks into running from the road either," Elias replied. "My place is mine to decide." Sheriff McCall glanced at Langford. "We'll be riding through later, keeping an eye out. If she's in trouble, we'll help. If not, well, we'll do what's right." Elias wanted to say that sometimes what's right was standing aside and letting a stranger be human, but he kept his mouth shut. The sheriff's definition of right and his own often traveled different roads. When he returned to the ranch, the sun was already low, burning gold along the horizon. The barn's shadow stretched long and thin. Tala sat by the trough, her head bowed, a blanket across her shoulders against the chill that crept almost immediately with the fall of light. "They'll be back," she said when he approached. Her voice held a calm that trembled at the edges. "I know," Elias said. "We'll be ready." She looked up at him then, and for the first time a small, rare look slid across her features. Gratitude so plain it almost hurt to see. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged, looking away. "Don't thank me yet. Folks might come with more than words." He could see her fear sharpen and then dim when he spoke. She listened like a person who had been told a painful truth and then gifted shelter against it. It was a rare kind of relief. That night the barn was quieter than it had been the first night she'd come. The horses breathed softly in their stalls. The lantern threw a warm circle on the floor, and the cot creaked gently whenever Tala shifted in sleep. Elias sat at the edge of the hayloft with a mug of coffee growing cold, watching the flames of the lantern gutter slightly when the wind picked up. He thought of his wife and the way she had been the kind of person who stepped across a room and made it softer. He thought of the long years since her absence, the simple rituals that had become his anchor. And he thought of Tala, who had come in like a thunderstorm, surprising and terrible and necessary. At some point in the night, a low sound woke him. He climbed down, lantern in hand, moving with the old certainty of someone who knew the layout of his own life well. Tala had risen quietly and stood by the open barn door, the night air wrapping around her. She looked out across the plains like a sentinel, the outline of her tall frame cut thin by moonlight. "You can't keep watch forever," he said softly. "You need sleep." She turned her head. "I cannot sleep when others might come for me. I must be ready." "You slept some during the day," he pointed out. "My mind is awake. My hands cannot be still." Elias set the lantern on a bale of hay. "Then rest those hands on me. I'll keep the watch." She studied him for a long time as if weighing the worth of a promise. Finally she nodded almost imperceptibly. "Very well." He settled into a chair, the lantern's glow on his weathered hands, and Tala at last lay back on the cot. The night breathed around them, and the world seemed to wait along with him. They were two people from different moons and maps, now sharing a thin circle of safety, each willing, if only for a night, to trust the other's guard. The quiet was fragile, but it was also honest. It contained the promise of resistance and the possibility of something softer. Outside, the plain slept under a cover of stars, and in that darkness, every small light felt like a covenant. Tomorrow the riders might come back. Tomorrow might bring louder accusations. But tonight the barn held two breaths, steady and close. In a place where the world often chose sides, the barn had chosen shelter. Neither requested explanation. Both accepted it. The thought of tomorrow sat at the back of Elias's mind like a weight. Yet as he watched Tala's chest rise and fall, as he heard the animals settle into restful sounds, he allowed himself a small, reckless hope that even in a land that remembered old cruelties, human kindness could take root again. The sunrise came in thin layers of gold and rose, as if the sky itself were bracing for a day heavier than most. Elias Crowley stood outside his house before the sun had fully breached the distant ridge, staring at the long stretch of road that cut across his land like an old scar. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but he hadn't noticed. Sleep had barely touched him. Every quiet sound of the night had carried the echo of gathering footsteps, of men riding in from town with their minds already made up. The land was too still. Even the wind seemed watchful. Tala emerged from the barn a few minutes later, her blanket draped over her shoulders, hair falling in loose waves around her face. She walked slowly, not because her injured leg demanded it, though it did, but because her mind was preparing itself for what the horizon would soon bring. She moved with the discipline of someone who had lived with danger long before this ranch ever offered shelter. "You been up long?" Elias asked, not taking his eyes off the road. "I watched the stars fade," Tala replied. "My sleep is restless. Can't blame you." She stopped beside him, her presence tall and solid at his shoulder. They stood in silence for a long moment. The kind of silence that spoke more honestly than words about fear, loyalty, and the uncertain line between them. "Will they come?" Tala asked. "They will," Elias said. "Men don't ride all the way out here just to let a thing go." Tala's hands tightened at her sides. "I am sorry." "For what?" "For bringing this heaviness to your land." Elias turned to look at her. Really look at her. The early light softened the sharp planes of her face, revealing exhaustion, yes, but also something deeper. A resolve that reached beyond her own safety. It dawned on him then that she carried the weight of her village with her. Every step she'd taken across the harsh frontier, accompanied by the responsibility to survive for others. "You didn't bring trouble," Elias said. "Fear brought it. That's not the same thing." Tala held his gaze, and the faintest shift passed through her expression, something like gratitude, wrapped in disbelief. Trust was a slow-growing thing, but it was growing nonetheless. Elias set down his cup. "Come on, let's get ready. Not for fightin', for talkin'." Tala nodded. Words can be sharp. They can, but they can be steady too. They walked the property together, checking the gates and the stalls. Not out of strategy, but out of habit. Elias knew the look of a morning before trouble, the feeling that the air itself held its breath. Tala knew it too. Her hand brushed the fence posts as she passed, as if touching the physical world could help her steady her thoughts. The horses sensed the tension, shifting restlessly in their stalls. Tala paused beside Silverbell, running a calming hand down the mare's neck. The animal relaxed, leaning slightly into her touch. Elias found himself watching the scene with an ache he hadn't expected. Tala, despite her imposing height and hardened experience, had a gentleness in her that spoke louder than her silence ever could. "You calm animals better than I do," he said. "Their spirits are honest," she answered. "They listen before they judge." Elias huffed softly. "Wish I could say the same for people." By mid-morning, a faint tremor in the ground vibrated through the soles of their boots. Tala stiffened. Elias looked toward the ridge. Dust, rising in a long, horizontal smear. More riders than yesterday. He felt Tala step slightly behind him, not out of fear, but out of respect for his home. Elias lifted a hand, signaling for her to remain there. He didn't want her standing alone, facing down a cluster of frightened men who might mistake her height or silence for threat. The riders grew clearer, 6, 8, maybe more. Men from town, men he recognized from markets and bartering tables, men who had once shared coffee with him after church services. They rode closer now with stern faces and rifles strapped across saddles. Sheriff McCall led them, posture stiff and expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. They stopped just beyond the front gate. "Crowley!" the sheriff called. "We need to talk!" Elias stepped forward with slow, deliberate steps. He could feel Tala's presence behind him. Not hiding, but but anchoring. Her steadiness seemed to spread into the air between them. "You're on my land," Elias said. "So talk decent," McCall inhaled. "We got concerns, Elias. Folks in town feel uneasy. Word spread that the woman you're sheltering might be trouble. Might be involved with the raids up north." "There ain't been any raids near here," Elias replied. "Not in months. Rumors say otherwise." Langford cut in, his horse pawing at the ground. "And we can't take that chance." Elias folded his arms. "What you're calling rumors, I call excuses." Langford's face tightened. "She's Apache, Crowley. Don't pretend that doesn't mean something. It means she's a person, same as us." A ripple went through the group. Some men glanced at Tala with unease. Others kept their eyes down, unsure. Fear had taken root among them, but not all were convinced of its direction. Sheriff McCall cleared his throat. "We don't want bloodshed here, Elias. But we need the truth. Why is she here? And how long is she staying?" Elias's voice lowered, steady as the land beneath their feet. "She came for rest, for food. She's injured. And she's staying till she's strong enough to walk out of here safe." "Safe?" Langford scoffed. "Safe from what?" Elias stared at him. "From exactly what you're bringing here," the group murmured. Some bristled. Others shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff raised a hand for quiet. Tala stepped forward then, not enough to seem confrontational, but enough to be seen. Elias instinctively reached halfway toward her, but she gave the slightest shake of her head. She wanted to speak. "I have harmed no one," she said, her voice clear and low. "I am a traveler. I sought only water and rest. My people suffer hunger. I walked far to find medicines. That is all." Her calm tone unsettled the men more than anger would have. They expected hostility, defiance, something that would justify their fear. Instead, they were met with dignity. Langford shifted in his saddle. "Your people and ours don't mix." "Never have." Tala looked at him with eyes that had seen too much loss to bother with anger. "Fear builds walls. Hunger builds desperation. I came with neither." The sheriff rubbed his jaw. Doubt flickered in his gaze, but the pressure of the group kept him from showing it fully. "We can't risk misunderstandings," McCall said. "If you're not hiding anything, then let us escort her out of the county. That would settle things." Elias stepped forward, placing himself fully between Tala and the riders. Even the horses seemed to sense the shift in him. "No," he said, "she ain't going anywhere with a bunch of men who already decided what she is. If she walks out of here, it'll be because she chooses to, not because she's forced." Langford's expression hardened. "Then you're choosing her over us." "I'm choosing what's right." Silence followed. A long, taut silence carried by the wind across dry grass. The sheriff looked at his men, then back at Elias. "Last chance. We don't want to escalate this." Elias's jaw tightened. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Behind him, Tala stood still as carved stone, her presence strong but patient. She didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't move. She simply stayed, shoulder squared, chin lifted, eyes unwavering. Her calm defiance said more than any action could. When Elias spoke, it was with a quiet that cut sharper than shouting. "She stays." The sheriff's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, not in defeat, more in realization. Elias Crowley was not a man who bent easily, and the woman behind him did not radiate the threat they had braced themselves for. One by one, the riders exhaled their held breath. Some lowered their rifles. Others backed their horses away slightly, tension slipping from their posture. They weren't convinced, not entirely, but the spark of hostility had dimmed. Langford scowled, frustrated at the shift. "You're making a mistake." "I've made plenty," Elias said. "This ain't one." The sheriff finally nodded. "We'll report this to the council, but for now, we'll leave things as they are." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't approval, but it was retreat. The men turned their horses and began the slow ride back to town. Dust rose behind them, dissolving into the wind. When they were far enough that their voices faded into the plains, Elias let out a deep breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Tala stepped closer, watching the shrinking silhouettes. "You stood," she said softly. "So did you." She shook her head. "You spoke for me." Elias met her eyes. "Someone had to, and I ain't ashamed it was me." The wind picked up, sweeping through the fields, bending the tall grass into long arcs. Tala looked around the ranch, the barn, the house, the open land, and her expression shifted. For the first time since she'd arrived, her features eased into something gentle, almost fragile. "This place," she murmured, "feels less lonely than it did before." Elias looked out across the horizon, the morning light finally warm on his skin. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it does." They stood there together, two silhouettes against the endless plains. No longer strangers, no longer uncertain shadows in each other's lives. The threat had passed for now, though neither knew what tomorrow might bring. But for this moment, the ranch felt like shelter again, and neither of them stood alone. The hours after the riders left passed slowly, as if the land itself needed time to breathe again. The dust they stirred up settled across the fence rails and faded into the grass, leaving the ranch in a strange hush. Elias walked the length of the property twice, checking the gates, checking the animals, checking anything his hands could reach. It wasn't that repair was needed. It was the movement he needed, the kind that kept his thoughts from tightening too quickly. Tala remained near the barn at first, her back against the outer wall, shoulders squared but lowered slightly from the tension she had carried all morning. She watched the horizon for a while, eyes narrowed as if she expected the men to reappear at any second. When the sun rose higher and the only movement on the plains was a drifting hawk, she finally let her stance soften. Elias saw her from the yard and walked toward her, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. She looked tired in a way deeper than physical exhaustion. He wondered how long she had been carrying the weight of fear and responsibility on her back, how many nights she had walked without the safety of a wall or roof, how many times she had clutched her knife, not to fight, but simply to feel like she had one thing left in her control. "You all right?" Elias asked. Tala lifted her eyes to him. "I am standing. That's something." "It is." She hesitated, then added softly, "More than I expected to be today." Elias looked out at the open stretch of land, the way the wind skimmed over it as though smoothing wrinkled cloth. "They won't be back today," he said. "Maybe not tomorrow either, but they will return." "Maybe," Elias admitted, "but not with the same fire. Men lose a little of their heat after they don't get the reaction they wanted." Tala considered this, her gaze long and thoughtful. "Fear," she murmured, "is a strange master. That it is. And it makes strange servants." He gave a faint chuckle. "You speak in ways that make a man think longer than he's used to." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that good? It ain't bad." Her lips shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough that Elias felt something inside him settle. They moved back toward the barn together. Elias noticed Tala's limp was worse than earlier. He slowed his pace without drawing attention to it, letting her match him comfortably. When they reached the barn doors, he pushed them open and stepped aside, letting her enter first. The inside smelled of hay and quiet warmth. Silverbell lifted her head, soft snorts drifting from her nostrils. The other horses shifted, relaxing now that Tala was back inside. Animals sensed change quicker than people. Today, they sensed peace creeping slowly back into the air. Tala sat on the cot with a long breath. Elias fetched a bucket of cool water from the well and brought it to her without a word. She took it gratefully, cupping her hands and sipping slowly. The water left trails down her wrists and into the dust on the floor. "You should rest that knee again," Elias said. "It's had enough pushin' for one day." "I have rested more in 2 days here than in 20 on the road," she replied. "My body remembers how to be still." "And your spirit?" She paused, letting the question sit. "It is quieter," she admitted. Elias sat on an overturned crate across from her. "Quiet's good." "For some," she said. For others, it is unfamiliar. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you something," he said. "This ranch has been too quiet for years now. So quiet you start hearing the absence more than the sounds that are still here. I didn't realize how heavy that gets until you showed up. You brought something back." Tala watched him closely, her dark eyes steady. "What did I bring?" "Life," he said simply. "A voice, a pair of footsteps that ain't mine. You made this place feel like a home again, instead of an empty piece of land." Her breath stilled a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You speak as though you have walked with loneliness." "I have," Elias said, "more years than I can count." "And yet," she said slowly, "you opened your door to me." He gave a small shrug. Couldn't turn away someone who needed help. "You could have," she said. "Many would have." "Maybe," Elias said, "but that's not who I am." Tala looked down at her hands, rough and strong, yet trembling slightly. "In my village," she said, "we say that kindness is a river. It flows even when the land is dry. You may not see where it begins, but you know its strength when you feel it." Elias felt something warm move through him at her words. "That's beautiful. It is old," she said. "Older than I can imagine, passed down through many voices. And now you're passing it to me." Tala nodded slowly. "Perhaps." The day's heaviness slowly dissolved as they worked together through the afternoon. Tala insisted on helping even with her injury, and Elias had stopped trying to argue with her. They hauled a few hay bales, fed the horses, checked the troughs, and shared a quiet lunch beneath the shade of the barn overhang. It was the kind of simple work that eased the mind, tasks that didn't demand thought, only presence. As evening crept closer, the sky shifted into soft purples and muted oranges. Elias and Tala walked to the fence line, leaning their arms along the top rail. The land stretched endlessly before them, the setting sun casting long shadows that trembled with the breeze. Tala broke the silence first. "I have not told you everything," she said quietly. Elias looked over at her. "You don't owe me everything." "But I wish to tell you," she said, "if you will listen." "I will." She inhaled slowly, gathering the pieces of her story. "When I left my village, I carried not only the burden of finding medicine, I carried the fear of what would become of my people if I failed. Children weaken, elders grow thin, mothers go to sleep hungry so their children can eat. Every day the drought grows worse. That is the weight I carry." Elias absorbed her words with a heaviness of his own. "You shouldn't have been walking. That load alone." "Who else would do it?" she asked softly. "I am known as a protector. It is my duty to walk hard roads." "A protector deserves protection too." She studied him for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was softer than any he had heard from her yet. "You have given me that." Elias swallowed, his throat tightening strangely. "I'm just doing what feels right." "You have done more," she said. "You made me feel safe. That is not a small thing." The sky deepened into twilight. Crickets began their nightly song. Elias felt the warmth of her words settle deep, reaching the part of him that had long believed such connection was behind him forever. Neither spoke for a time. The wind carried the scent of dry sagebrush. The last light of dusk traced the contours of the land. Finally, Elias said, "When your leg gets better, what will you do?" Tala lowered her gaze. "I must return. My people need what I carry." "I figured as much." "You have a life here," she said, "a land that needs you, a place that breathes your name. This place was mighty quiet before you came." "And it will be quiet again," she said. "Maybe," he replied, "but I'll remember the sound of your footsteps on this dirt." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part gratitude, part sorrow, part something softer. "I will remember this place," she said, "and the man who gave me shelter when I had none." Elias felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't push. She had a life beyond his land, a duty beyond his home, and love, whatever shape it had begun to grow into, could not ask her to abandon that. As the last sliver of sun dipped beneath the horizon, Tala shifted her weight and winced. Elias immediately reached toward her without thinking. She steadied herself before he could help. "I am all right," she said. "You're stubborn," Elias replied gently. "Yes," she admitted. "I have been told." He huffed. "By who?" "By you," she said. He chuckled softly. "Fair enough." They walked back to the barn together. Elias held the lantern while Tala settled onto the cot. The dim glow cast warm light across her face, softening the lines of fatigue. She watched him adjust the lantern's wick, an unreadable expression in her eyes. "You should sleep," he said. "You too." He nodded but didn't move for a moment. Something unspoken hung between them, something neither dared to reach for nor push away. "Good night, Tala," he said at last. "Good night, Elias." He stepped out of the barn and closed the door slowly behind him. The air outside was cool and still. The stars began to scatter across the sky like grains of silver. Elias looked up at them for a long moment. This ranch had known silence for years. But now the silence felt different. It felt shared. And that, he realized, was enough to change a man's entire world. In the end, the old rancher and the giant Apache sister discovered that true strength isn't found in weapons or in walls, but in the quiet courage to trust another heart. Their meeting was born from hardship, shaped by danger, and strengthened by compassion. And though their worlds were different, their shared silence, shared struggles, and shared healing built something that neither of them expected. Something gentle, steady, and unmistakably real. Sometimes, love arrives not in grand gestures, but in the soft footsteps of a stranger who becomes the only person you can finally call home. If you enjoyed this emotional Wild West journey, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, the channel where every tale is filled with courage, healing, and unforgettable frontier romance. Hit that subscribe button now so you never miss the next powerful story from the untamed heart of the West.